Antarctica is a really wonderful place for science, partly because it's so isolated and it's a very pristine environment. So we can be fairly confident that the measurements we make aren't contaminated by any of the pollutants that you might find here in the Northern Hemisphere.
The brilliant things we noticed when we were there was the sheer exposure of the rocks. For a geologist, it's absolute heaven, because where the rocks appear above the ice, you see everything. There's no vegetation, nothing to get in the way. So it's a very sort of clear environment to do science in.
Just wanted to give you a quick tour of our campsite here. These are our tents lined up beautifully. And what we've managed to create is somewhere where you can go to the toilet comfortably. It's got a beautiful view. Toilet roll holder. That's obviously where the poo goes, in there. And it's a beautiful, beautiful igloo.
Pretty much throughout the night and all day today, we've had winds that have been gusting up to about 30 knots. It's meant lots of digging out of the tent, and it's meant an awful lot of noise and rattling of the tent through the night and through the day.
One of the views I think that has emerged over the last 5 decades is that science has to think far more carefully about its environmental impact. For the first 2 or 3 decades of the treaty's existence, the environmental impact to science wasn't considered terribly important. If it had an environmental cost, well, so be it. The Antarctic is a very large place, and scientists are only found in a limited number of areas. That's changed.
Antarctica is the most southerly point of land on the globe. It covers an area larger than Australia. It's the coldest continent on the planet and is constantly covered in a layer of ice, holding the record for the lowest temperature ever recorded on the Earth's surface at -89 degrees centigrade. But although Antarctica is frozen and almost uninhabited, people still come here to undertake geography fieldwork. A glacier is a huge sheet of ice formed of compacted snow, which often fills whole valleys. Glaciers cover 10% of the world's surface, wherever summertime temperatures don't rise enough to melt the winter snow. In Antarctica, where temperatures rarely ever rise above freezing, there are some huge glaciers for scientists to study. Their project is looking at holes in the ice called cryoconite holes. These are caused by dust and dirt settling on the glacier. The dust absorbs the sun's heat. The warmed up particles then melt a hole down into the ice.
As more of these cryoconite holes develop, then they're going to create, essentially if they join together, they'll create rivers either on the surface of the glacier or beneath the glacier. And then when those rivers begin to form, then they lubricate the bottom of the glacier, which actually causes the whole thing to move much more quickly. So it's linked up with issues to do with climate change and global warming.
Yep. It's the abundance and distribution of these holes that they're measuring incrementally.
Yep. As geographers, we're interested in distributions and patterns, whether it's your population distribution across the country or across the world or things like that. So the idea of looking at the distribution of the cryoconite holes was to see, was there a pattern? Were they evenly distributed? Were they unevenly distributed? Were they in a very random pattern? Was it a very regular pattern?
Despite the efforts of the Antarctic Treaty and the scientists, there are a number of pressures on Antarctica which are increasingly threatening this delicate continent. The first pressure is the sheer number of people visiting. People can now pay for a holiday there. They can take a boat to the coast to look at the wildlife and icebergs, or they can fly onto the ice and climb mountains or visit the South Pole. A holiday like this isn't cheap, typically costing around £20,000. But the number of people visiting Antarctica is rising. One company that runs trips there has a base 500 miles from the South Pole, and is becoming an increasingly popular destination.
It seems to be a rising number. We got 320 this year. This isn't a Scott or Shackleton type expedition anymore. There's no reason why people shouldn't come here and pit their wits against it.
However, many people question whether trips like this should be run.
Well, I think there are a number of fears. One is, for example, what if certain popular destinations on the Antarctic Peninsula show evidence of environmental damage? Can the environment cope with more tourists? And also, I suppose, is this the kind of vision we have of the Antarctic, where it becomes a sort of fantasy playground for rich, possibly even stupid people to get up to all kinds of endeavours?
To actually come to Antarctica, many people appreciate it, and because they've come, they really can see it in perspective, and there's a lot of drive, environmental drive, by the tourists coming here. I don't think we're going to get swamped like many places in the world with tourism, but I think it's important that they spread the word of what a fantastic continent it is.
There is only one Antarctica, and it's rapidly changing due to human influences such as scientific research, tourism, and most notably, global climate change. Even today, Antarctica is a hard place to get to, and only a few thousand people a year visit. Because it has never been colonized by man, there are no natives to Antarctica. This means it's not a country itself, has no government, and therefore no way of controlling what happens there. During the 1950s, as more people travelled to Antarctica, countries including Britain tried to claim it for themselves, so the Antarctic Treaty was drawn up.
First of all, the treaty says that the Antarctic is a demilitarized zone. It is also the world's first nuclear-free zone. It places particular emphasis on scientific collaboration. It says that the territorial claims to the Antarctic are considered suspended for the duration of the treaty. The treaty also says that information must be freely exchanged. And finally, the treaty says that it's open to signatory by any other United Nations member state.
As well as fears about the development of tourism, there is another pressure that wasn't considered in the original 1961 treaty.
When the Antarctic Treaty was signed, there was no mention of minerals and the possibility of mineral exploration, and there was no mention of the environment.
And what we've seen, of course, in the last 30 or 40 years is growing oil and natural gas exploitation in the Arctic. So some will say, if it's possible in the Arctic, might it be possible in the Antarctic?
The fear is, as climate change occurs, it's likely that more rock could be exposed as ice melts, enabling people to get drilling rigs in.
My fear is, though, in 50 or 60 years' time, the debate over mining in the Antarctic might not seem as preposterous as it seems now.
As well as the threat from tourism and mining, there is a third man-made pressure on Antarctica, which could be devastating: global climate change.
Scientists who work in the Antarctic are saying that there's a real issue regarding ice cap stability, and the polar regions in some senses, bear the brunt of human-induced global climate change.